The quilt was heavier than I expected. Thick, hand-stitched, still smelling faintly of cedar from the chest it had been folded in for months. The oil lamp on the dresser had burned low, and the room had gone cold enough that I could see my own breath. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked, my husband, moving quietly, careful not to wake the house that wasn't sleeping at all. No one had told me what this night was supposed to feel like. Only that it would be different from every night before it. My name is Rebecca. I grew up Amish, and this channel is where I tell the truths no one prepared me for. If you've ever wondered what really separates our world from the Mennonite one, especially on nights like this, stay close. Subscribe if this finds you, and tell me in the comments, what's one thing about your own wedding night nobody warned you about? The room was quiet in a way that felt almost loud. I sat on the edge of the bed we'd share for the first time, and I thought about my cousin Anna's wedding, 3 years before mine. She was Mennonite. I remember standing in her kitchen afterward, watching her laugh with her new husband like nothing had shifted at all, and thinking, we are not getting the same thing. Not even close. That night, alone in my own room, I finally understood how deep that difference ran. It wasn't just about clothing, or church, or which hymn book we sang from. It was about everything that happened after the singing stopped. Our wedding day had lasted from morning until well past dark. There were 2 sittings for the meal, sometimes 3, depending on how many people the barn could hold. Aunts brought pies they'd been baking since Tuesday. Uncles moved benches from house to house, the same benches that would carry the weight of another wedding next season, and another after that. Anna's wedding had felt different even in daylight, smaller, faster, more contained. A morning ceremony, an afternoon meal, and by evening, she and her husband were already gone, driving off in a car that was theirs alone. We didn't have that. We had days. My dress was a soft blue, plain and unadorned, and I already knew it wouldn't be worn again for celebration. One day, years from now, it would become something else, a dress for mourning, folded away and brought back out when grief required it. Anna wore white, like the pictures in magazines, a dress that existed for one day only and then went into a box, never to be seen in either joy or sorrow again. I didn't think much of this at the time. It was only later, holding my own dress in my hands, that I understood how differently our communities thought about beginnings and endings. For us, they were never fully separate. The house that night was full of family. My parents were down the hall. My husband's brothers were staying in the barn loft, laughing too loudly at something, until someone's mother told them to hush. There was no true privacy, not the kind Anna described when she talked about driving away that evening into a life that belonged only to the 2 of them. Ours belonged to everyone, at least at first. The community didn't leave when the ceremony ended. It simply moved into the next room and waited, quietly, to see how we would settle. I remember resetting myself in small ways that night, running my hand over the quilt, feeling each uneven stitch, counting them almost, the way you count sheep when your mind won't slow down. The lamp flickered once and steadied. Outside, an owl called, and I found myself grateful for a sound that had nothing to do with weddings or husbands or any of it. Just a bird, doing what it always did, on a night that was supposed to be different for me and wasn't different for anything else in the world. Anna told me once, years after her own wedding, that she and her husband had gone straight to their new home that same night, a small rented house 2 towns over, empty except for a bed and a table someone had given them. No family down the hall. No brothers laughing in a loft. Just the 2 of them, deciding together what their first hours as a married couple would look like. When she told me this, I felt something twist in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was closer to grief for a version of that night I never got to have. We, on the other hand, would stay with his parents for the first weeks. This was simply how it was done. The elders believed a new marriage needed the steadying hand of the community around it, at least at the start, not because they didn't trust us, but because independence wasn't something our world valued the way Anna's did. Her community trusted a young couple to find their own footing alone. Ours believed footing was found together, surrounded, watched over gently by people who had done this before us and would do it again after we were gone. There was one thing I couldn't shake that night. even as I finally lay down beside my husband and listened to the house grow still around us. Nobody had truly sat me down and told me what to expect. Not my mother, not the women at the last quilting frolic, not anyone. I would learn much later that Anna's experience of that silence had not been the same as mine at all. But that difference, the biggest one, wasn't something I understood yet. It would take me years and a conversation I never expected to have to see it clearly. My husband turned toward me in the dark, and I could hear him breathing carefully, like a man trying not to disturb something fragile. He was as unprepared as I was. I understood that even then, though it would take years before I could say it kindly instead of with resentment. No one had sat him down either. No father, no bishop, no older brother had taken him aside and explained anything beyond what was expected of a husband in the eyes of the church. We were two people who had grown up singing the same hymns, sitting through the same long services, and somehow neither of us had been given the words for this particular night. The ordnung governed nearly everything else in our lives, how we dressed, how we worked, how we worshipped, but here, in this one room, it simply went silent. That silence had a shape to it, if that makes sense. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything unsaid, passed down through generations of women who had also not been told, who had also lain awake on their own wedding nights wondering if what they felt was normal or strange, or something to be ashamed of. Anna's family had not been silent in that way. She told me, much later, that her mother had sat with her the week before her wedding and talked plainly, gently, about what to expect. Not everything, she said, but enough. Enough that she wasn't walking into the dark completely alone. I reached over and touched the quilt again, tracing the same stitches I'd counted hours before, and I thought about Gelassenheit, the yielding, the surrender we were taught from childhood. Submit to God, submit to the church, submit to your husband, submit to the community's wisdom over your own. It wasn't a cruel idea. In many ways, it had held our people together for generations, kept us gentle with each other when the world outside seemed to reward the opposite. But that night, surrender meant something else too. It meant not asking questions. It meant trusting that discomfort was simply part of what a wife carried, quietly, without complaint. Anna once told me about a moment early in her own marriage when something felt wrong to her, and she said so, out loud, to her husband, that same week. He listened. They talked. It resolved itself gently, the way small things do when two people feel permitted to speak. I didn't have that permission, not because my husband would have refused it, but because I didn't know speaking was even a door I was allowed to open. That was the difference I'd sensed on my wedding night without being able to name it. It wasn't about what happened in that room. It was about how much silence surrounded it before, during, and long after. I want to be fair here, because both things are true at once. There was a kind of beauty in how private our community kept these matters, a modesty that protected something sacred from becoming cheap or careless. I've watched the outside world treat intimacy as entertainment, and I don't envy that. But privacy without preparation isn't the same as reverence. Somewhere along the way, our silence stopped protecting something sacred and started protecting nobody at all, not the brides, not the grooms. Not the marriages that struggled quietly because two people didn't know how to talk to each other about the most vulnerable night of their lives. It took me almost 4 years of marriage and one long conversation with a counselor I saw after we left the community to understand what had actually happened that night and in the months that followed. She didn't blame my husband. She didn't blame my faith. She helped me see that we had both been handed an impossible task, intimacy without instruction, closeness without conversation, and that we'd done our best with what we'd been given, which wasn't enough, through no real fault of our own. That reframing changed something in me. It let me stop being angry at a boy who had been just as lost as I was, and start being angry, gently, at a silence that had outlived its purpose generations ago. I don't regret my wedding day. I remember the benches, the pies, the sound of my mother crying happy tears in the kitchen doorway. I remember my husband's hand steady when mine was not. What I carry now isn't bitterness, it's clarity, the kind that only comes with distance and time and permission to finally ask the questions nobody offered me at 17. I think about Anna sometimes, and I don't wish I'd had her wedding instead of mine. I only wish someone had trusted me with a little more truth before I walked into that room. If you're watching this and some part of it feels familiar, the silence, the surrender, the wedding night you weren't quite prepared for, no matter what world you come from, I want you to know that your questions were always allowed. They still are. Speaking about what confuses or hurts you is never a failure of faith or a betrayal of family. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply say, out loud, I didn't understand, and I wish someone had told me. That sentence alone can change everything that comes after it.